You know, it's crazy to think, like, before the pandemic hit, so many people were already struggling.
Yeah.
And, we're talking about, like, over half of Black adults in America dealing with anxiety and depression, but not even getting the help they needed.
It's a staggering statistic.
It really is. And
Mm.
today, we're going deep into all of this, like what's going on with minority mental health in the U.S.
Absolutely.
We've got Dr. Corey Emanuel with us. He's like a leading expert in media psychology, and he's done so much work focused on men's mental health.
Right.
He's going to break it all down for us, like how social factors and even the justice system play into all of this.
For sure. And like masculinity norms too. We'll get into that.
Yeah, that's huge. We're not just talking numbers here, folks.
Yeah.
This is about real lives
Absolutely.
and how we can actually make a difference. So whether this is something you're dealing with personally, or you're worried about someone you love,
Mm.
or even if you just want to be more informed, stick with us because this deep dive is for you.
I think it's important to start with this idea that, mental health isn't just about not being sick.
Oh, interesting.
It's like a whole spectrum of well-being.
Okay, so like a scale.
Exactly. On one side, you've got like optimal functioning, you're thriving, and then on the other end,
No.
sadly, you have like severe distress.
We're all kind of moving along this spectrum throughout our lives.
Exactly. And where we land at any given point, like right now,
Yeah.
it depends on a ton of factors, like everyday stress, what happened in the past,
Right.
and sadly, deeply ingrained issues like racism.
Yeah, you can't ignore that.
The tough part is these things don't affect everyone in the same way.
That makes sense. And that brings us to like a huge issue, access to mental health care.
For sure.
The data is pretty clear on this.
Mm.
Minorities, especially Black and Hispanic
Mhm.
individuals,
Yeah.
they're way less likely to get the treatment they need compared to white folks.
It's a disparity that's been around for far too long.
So what's causing this gap?
There are a bunch of layers to this issue, but a major one is systemic inequalities,
Right.
which impact access to good quality healthcare across the board. For a lot of minorities,
Yeah,
just finding affordable healthcare is a struggle in itself.
it's true.
And then on top of that, you have the challenge of finding culturally competent pair.
Meaning what exactly?
Like, imagine opening up about your deepest struggles to someone who doesn't get where you're coming from culturally.
Yeah, I can see how that would be a barrier.
It's a big one.
Yeah.
A lot of people just don't feel comfortable or understood by providers who don't share their background.
So they end up suffering in silence.
Exactly. They feel like they can't connect with the people who are supposed to help.
It's heartbreaking, and this lack of access, it just creates a ripple effect, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It can lead to worse mental health outcomes for whole communities.
Wow.
Which just keeps the cycle going.
Like a domino effect.
Exactly. The lack of access widens the gap, and then you see even bigger disparities in mental health.
And we can't talk about all of this without addressing the elephant in the room.
You got it, racism.
It's everywhere. Dr. Emanuel's research is so clear on this, like racial discrimination directly impacts well-being.
Absolutely.
It leads to isolation. It chips away at your self-esteem. It just creates this overall sense of distress.
He uses this term weathering to describe it.
Weathering.
Yeah, like the constant exposure to racism and discrimination over time, it takes a toll.
Mentally and physically.
Both. It wears people down.
That's such a powerful way to put it. It's not
Mhm.
just a one-time thing.
Yeah,
It's like this constant barrage of microaggressions, biases, and systemic barriers.
Exactly.
And this is where we get into masculinity norms, right?
Right.
Especially for Black men.
That's a critical piece of the puzzle.
Dr. Emanuel's very vocal about this. He says that traditional masculinity, that whole idea of being strong and stoic,
Yep.
that it can actually be a huge barrier for Black men who need help.
It creates this awful internal conflict, like you're struggling, you need help, but society tells you that asking for help is weak.
So they stay silent.
Exactly. And it leads to so much isolation and suffering.
It's just heartbreaking to think about how many men are trapped in that cycle, feeling like they have to carry the weight all alone.
And you know what it often leads to? Higher rates of mental health conditions that go undiagnosed and untreated.
Wow.
They might turn to unhealthy ways of coping or just try to push through it, which just makes things worse.
Makes sense.
It's not just about them, though.
Right.
This pressure to appear strong, it impacts families and communities, too.
It's like this chain reaction where men can't express their emotions or get help,
Exactly.
and then it affects the relationships, how they parent, their overall well-being.
It really does.
It can lead to unhealthy coping mechanisms and strained connections.
And, untreated mental health issues, they contribute to relationship problems, substance abuse, even violence.
It's a lot to think about.
It is. It's a reminder that mental health touches every part of our lives.
But it's not all doom and gloom, right?
No, not all.
Dr. Emmanuel's work is so powerful because he offers solutions.
He
He talks about creating safe spaces where men can open up challenging those harmful masculinity norms and embracing culturally competent care.
he wants to redefine strength,
Interesting.
shift the focus from stoicism to vulnerability.
I like that.
Strength isn't about hiding your emotions.
Right.
It's about being brave enough to acknowledge them and get help when you need it.
That's a message we all need to hear, not just in Black communities, but everywhere.
I agree.
We need to break down the stigma around mental health.
Yeah,
Create a culture where it's okay to not be okay.
couldn't agree more.
And it's important to remember, mental health isn't one size fits all.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What works for one person might not work for another.
Especially in diverse communities with different experiences and backgrounds.
Exactly. And that's why culturally competent care is so crucial.
So it's about understanding and respecting those differences and tailoring treatment accordingly.
Think about it like this.
Okay.
You're seeking help from a therapist, but they don't get the cultural nuances of your experience.
Yep.
The historical trauma that might be shaping your struggles,
Yeah.
it makes a world of difference to have a therapist who connects with you on a deeper level.
It's about feeling seen, heard, and understood.
Exactly.
That validation can be so powerful, especially for people from marginalized communities who may have faced discrimination in healthcare.
It's about fostering trust, empathy, a genuine connection.
And that can be transformative.
It encourages people to open up, engage in treatment, and ultimately achieve better outcomes.
Yeah, but as we've been talking about, it's not just about individual therapists being culturally competent.
Right.
It's about systemic change, too.
Absolutely. Healthcare systems and institutions need to become more inclusive.
So diversifying the mental health workforce.
Yes.
Providing culturally sensitive training to all providers.
For sure.
And addressing language barriers.
All of that. It's about creating a healthcare system that reflects the communities it serves.
And culturally competent care isn't just good for minority populations.
Nope.
It benefits everyone.
When we have a more inclusive and equitable system, we all win.
This deep dive has really highlighted how interconnected all these issues are.
It has.
Mental health isn't isolated. It's
Yeah.
linked to social, economic, environmental factors.
Recognizing those links is key to finding solutions.
It's not just about treating symptoms.
No, it's about addressing the root causes.
We need to look at the bigger picture.
Absolutely.
Mental health is a societal issue. We need to address those systemic inequalities,
Right.
work towards a more just and equitable society where everyone can thrive mentally and physically.
It's about empowering individuals and communities to take charge of their well-being.
So giving them access to information resources, support networks.
Exactly. We need to create a culture where we talk openly about mental health.
Where asking for help is seen as a strength.
It's about building resilience, fostering a sense of community.
And recognizing that mental health is a journey.
Not a destination.
There will be ups and downs.
For sure. Good days and bad days.
But with the right support.
Everyone can navigate those challenges and live a fulfilling life.
And that journey toward well-being, it starts with realizing we're not alone.
Right.
There are people who care resources out there and ultimately hope for a brighter future.
Absolutely.
Before we were talking about that holistic approach to mental health.
Yeah.
It's not just about treating those individual symptoms,
Right.
but tackling those deep-rooted social and economic and cultural factors that contribute to those symptoms.
It's about getting to the root of the problem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And one of those crucial factors is access to culturally competent care.
It's so important.
We've touched on it throughout our conversation, but it's worth circling back to.
I agree.
It's not just a nice to have.
Yeah.
It's fundamental to equitable healthcare.
It is.
But what does that actually look like in practice?
Well, you have to start by recognizing that different cultures have different beliefs and values,
Makes sense.
and even ways of expressing their distress.
Oh, that's interesting.
And these differences can really impact how people see mental health issues,
wow.
whether they even seek help and how they respond to different treatment approaches.
So a therapist who really gets those cultural nuances,
Yeah,
they can create a more welcoming and effective space.
absolutely.
Right.
That understanding builds trust. It makes communication clearer
Right.
and ultimately helps the therapist tailor the treatment to the individual's experience.
I see.
Imagine a therapist who can use culturally relevant metaphors, or someone who recognizes how historical trauma might be affecting a client.
Wow. Yeah, that's powerful.
It is. It's about meeting people where they are,
Right.
acknowledging their unique cultural lens and ensuring they feel seen and heard.
That validation can be life-changing.
especially for people from marginalized communities who
Yeah.
might have faced discrimination in healthcare settings.
Sadly, it happens all the time.
It does. But that feeling of being understood,
Yeah.
it can empower someone to finally open up, to fully engage in treatment.
And take ownership of their well-being.
Exactly. And it goes beyond individual therapists. It requires a systemic shift towards inclusivity.
So healthcare systems and institutions need to become more responsive to the needs of diverse populations.
Exactly. We need more diversity in the mental health workforce
Makes sense.
and culturally sensitive training for all providers.
And we've got to address those language barriers too.
Absolutely. It's about building a system that reflects the communities it serves.
And like you said earlier, culturally competent care isn't just good for minority populations.
Right.
It's good for everyone.
When we create a more inclusive and equitable system, we all benefit.
The win-win.
It really is. It's a win for the people seeking care, for the providers who can serve them better.
And ultimately for society as a whole.
Exactly.
This deep dive has been eye-opening.
It has.
We've talked about the challenges, but also the solutions.
There's always hope.
As we wrap up, what's one final thought you want to leave our listeners with?
I want them to remember that amidst all the complexities we've discussed, there is hope. There are organizations like Beam the Black Emotional and Mental Health Collective doing amazing work.
Yeah,
There are people in communities fighting for change, pushing for more equitable systems.
that's encouraging.
And most importantly, there's growing awareness about mental health and a willingness to have open conversations.
And that willingness to talk, to share our stories, to listen with empathy.
That's where real progress starts.
It's about recognizing that we're all in this together.
Absolutely. Mental health is a collective responsibility
We all have a role to play.
in creating a world where everyone can access the support they need.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
My pleasure.
Remember, if you're struggling, you're not alone. There's help out there. Reach out to a friend, a family member,
We're a mental health professional.
or a trusted community organization.
And don't underestimate the power of connection and support.
It can make all the difference.
You are strong, you are resilient, and you are worthy of care.
Take care of yourselves. Keep those conversations going. And until next time, this is The Deep Dive signing off.